Okay. All right, we're going to get started. Greetings to all of you who joined us from different parts of the world. My name is Carrie McLean, and I'm a member of the steering committee that organized the International Commission of Inquiry on Systemic Racist Police Violence Against People of African Descent in the United States. I'm honored to welcome you all to this side event, which is presented to inform you all about the work of the Commission of Inquiry. The work of the Commission of Inquiry is one part of a collective struggle towards liberation. In June 2020, an international coalition of hundreds of organizations and individuals sent a communication to the United Nations Human Rights Council urging that the UN convene a commission of inquiry to investigate racism and racist police violence in the United States. The communication was sent to the UN due to the excellent organizing done by the US Human Rights Network and the ACLU Human Rights Program, and with the support of grassroots organizations such as Mothers Against Police Brutality and other individuals. The UN declined the request to convene a commission of inquiry, though it did task the UN High Commissioner on Human Rights with preparing a report on racism. Following the UN's decision to not convene a commission of inquiry, the National Conference of Black Lawyers, the National Lawyers Guild, and the International Association of Democratic Lawyers decided to convene a commission of inquiry to conduct the thorough and impartial investigation of police violence in the US that the community had demanded. The Commission of Inquiry's mandate was to investigate the systemic, widespread, and grave violations of the rights of Black people by police in the United States and present its findings and recommendations in a report. We assembled a team of 12 experts, commissioners, none of whom are from the United States, to conduct the investigations in an independent and impartial manner. We conducted live hearings where the commissioners heard testimony from the family members of victims of police violence, testimony from lawyers who represent the families of victims, and testimony from community activists. The commissioners also reviewed reports, legislation, and other relevant materials. We concluded our live hearings last month, and our team of rapporteurs have been hard at work on a report. The report will be shared with the UN High Commissioner at the end of this month and shared with the public a few weeks after. We hope that our report will complement and support the work of the High Commissioner and serve as a resource to the community. Today, we've brought together 3 speakers to share reflections on the work of the Commission of Inquiry, as well as perspectives on systemic racist police violence against people of African descent in the United States. Our first speaker is Collette Flanagan, founder of Mothers Against Police Brutality. Collette?
Good morning and good evening to some. Thank you, Carrie. It's a pleasure to be a part of this esteemed panel today and working in collaboration with the Commission of Inquiry and their important work. So just glad to be here today. I started MAPD, Mothers Against Police Brutality, in 2013 when my only son, Clinton Allen, was murdered by a Dallas policeman on March the 10th. In 2013. MAPD is an organization that's dedicated to ending police violence against the public, particularly Black people who bear the greatest burden of this official oppression. In Clinton's case, he was unarmed. He was shot 7 times, 5 times in his upper torso, 1 in his left arm, and the final shot was at close range, we found out later, in his back. As egregious as Clinton's death sounds, and I like to kind of step it out for people because it is echoed in the Black communities every day, almost every day. There is a police killing. And make no mistake about it, when there is an agency that wields that type of unchecked power in communities with impunity like the U.S. policeman has, it becomes a danger to our democracy, and it sets a global dangerous example. MAPD works from the unique perspective that gives you the lived experience from the lens of the families and the mothers that have lost children and loved ones to police brutality. And when you work from that particular lens and experience of losing a child or a loved one from police brutality, you have the opportunity to understand the total impact and the devastation and the rippling effect that when these egregious killings happen, and not only the breakdown and the destroying of family units, but communities are impacted greatly. The total impact that is often not seen by anyone, and we typically don't hear those stories. But for the immediate families who are left to pick up the pieces of their lives, the devastation that's left behind. I always say that for me, losing Clinton changed my DNA. It literally changed my DNA. I think that I'm a pretty strong person, but I have to tell you, every year on March 10th, on the day that Clinton was killed, every single year, it's like my body shuts down. I've talked to many of mothers that the devastation of losing a child to police violence or a loved one, and then not having the resources, not having the help, not being part of the investigations, which normally was what happens. Your child being maligned by the police department, they're taking over the narrative, and everyone that they shoot and kill in Black communities, or either a drug dealer on drugs, or we thought he had a gun or she had a gun. The devastation that's left behind from these killings is unfathomable. Families don't have a lot of, have no recourse, actually. Many attorneys can't even afford to take these cases because of the lengthy processes and just getting out of getting past summary judgment on these cases are almost impossible. When you talk about, families and the impact that we never see. MAPD has a network of over 400 families now, and we have helped very family members by headstones. We've had families that in the midst when they should be grieving and trying to figure out, how am I going to bury my child? They are in the kitchen. Mothers are in the kitchen and they are cooking dinners, and they are doing things that they can sell in their community to raise money to bury their children. In most cases, it's heartbreaking because there is a law in most states that have a state victims compensation fund that if you have the audacity of being killed by a policeman, you cannot partake of that fund. However, in some states, if a policeman that killed your child can claim that killing caused him or her stress, then that particular policeman can claim victims compensation funds that are not available to families. In addition, we know that the judicial process does not work for families. We have grand jury processes that are secret, district attorneys that do not allow the families to be a part of any of the process and investigations. They're totally kept out of the loop. There are many practices in individual states that overlay and are disturbing at best. We have district attorneys that are elected officials that are taking campaign contributions from their local police unions. How do you overcome that? We have criminal court judges that take campaign contributions from local police unions. How do you overcome that? Drug testing is not happening the way it should. If an officer wrecks a police car, destroys a property, he's drug tested. But if he or she kills someone, they're never drug tested. And we lose valuable information because it speaks to their state of mind, when that killing happened. But the victim is always drug tested. Police departments investigate themselves. And, I always say police departments, when they announce that the officer was justified and the shooting, that the shooting was justified, the killing was justified, even before the investigation is complete, well, what it does, it forms an opinions of individuals in the communities that may ultimately end up serving on the jury should it ever go to trial. And we know that juries have a hard time convicting policemen, and that's one of the issues because the narrative is taken over. These killings are devastating to community. It breaks the social contract, and when the social contract is broken in a community, there will never be any community policing. There is not any trust left. So how do you bridge that that gap in that social contract that has been ripped to shreds and torn apart? It takes really work. It takes work like holding policemen accountable, making sure that communities that are at higher risk of police violence feel safe. Now, how would you like to live in a community where you are afraid to send your child to the corner store because of his or her color or his style of clothing? Those are real fears. Like one of our mothers, Antoinette Washington, she knows that fear. Her son went to the store in 2007. Brandon Washington was killed by an off-duty policeman that was doing security in that store. And he killed Brandon over a 50-cent candy bar. A 50-cent candy bar. It turns out that a customer had purchased that candy bar for Brandon. And so these are real tangible fears. I just would like to say, as I close, that reforms like the George Floyd Act that was recently passed by the US House, but still has to clear the hurdle of passing the Senate, which, by the way, needs 10 Republican votes in order to pass the same number of votes that could not come together to hold the appropriate persons responsible for the Capitol insurrection on January the 6th. So we may not ever see that bill passed anytime soon, but it's a bill that should have been passed decades ago. This and other bills alike, which calls for the ending of chokeholds, for example, make things incrementally better. But I have to share with you that these reforms are no match for the current, the deep current of racism and brutality that run through our police departments. People like to say that there are a few bad apples. We are way past that cliche. It's a culture that has been cultivated in the United States and police department that have created orchards of diseased trees that are bearing rotten fruit that are killing our families. And there is a Derek Chauvin in every police department, and more than one, as we see the almost routine killing of Black men, as well as some of the officers' own racist anti-Islamic rants that we see in postings, violent social media posts that we see that are routinely ignored. We are suffering a national crisis of lethal police brutality fueled by racism and the lack of accountability when policemen kill. We believe at MAPB that the families should be in the forefront of this movement, and not because they want to be, but because they have the courage to be there. They are our inside people that can tell us how they were treated by the district attorney, what happened, how the investigation went, that things that we don't get to see on the inside lenses of an egregious police killing. The United States should not be held above the international law that protects the right of life and freedom from racial discrimination. I am an MAPD. We are proud to work in symphony with the Commission of Inquiry, and we hope that the United Nations adopts their forthcoming report that they have worked very hard on and putting example after example of egregious killing by policemen in the United States. Thank you for your time today.
Collette, thank you so much for those powerful remarks. I continue to be inspired by your courage and tenacity. Thank you. I know that you'd mentioned to me earlier that you might have to hop off a little early. How's it looking right now? I asked because there's a question for you, and I'll ask you to answer it now if you think you have to go.
Got a little bit of power left. It didn't look too good. I hope that I can just stay on as long as I can, but I'm down to 3%.
Okay, so let me just ask this question. Beth Lundy, she asked, can you please repeat what you just said about families of people killed by police not being eligible for victim compensation? Did I hear that right?
Yes, absolutely. Most of the victim compensation programs are state funded. And the state stipulates who gets those funds. And so we need to have compensation funds set aside for victims of police brutality and not just for the policeman that killed the victim. So that is right. There, or in some states, I think California is one of the few states where you can, although being killed by a policeman, still partake in that fund, but it's very rare.
Okay. Collette, so I think since you have to go, we'll end there, but thank you again. I'm so honored that you were able to be here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, I'm going to move on to our second speaker, Sir Claire K. Roberts, who was one of our commissioners, former Attorney General of Antigua and Barbuda, former president of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. Sir Claire? You're still muted, Sir Claire.
Yeah.
You're muted again. I'm not sure what happened. Okay, there you go.
Okay, good. I'm so sorry about that. Yes, I'm on step. This commission is made up of judges and professors and human rights experts from across the world. We have, as I just wanted to mention and to list them, we have from Barbados, from South Africa, from France, from Costa Rica, from UK and Kenya, from Japan, from Nigeria, from Jamaica, and I am from Antigua and Barbuda. The commission arose after the Human Rights Council passed its resolution 43-1, where it requested that the killing, I think George Floyd really brought international attention to the killing of Black people by policemen in the United States. The video went viral, as they say, across the world. And one could not help but be moved by the plaintive cry of George Floyd, I can't breathe, and him calling for his mother, and the attitude of the white policeman with his hands in his pocket. That picture really captured people across the world. And in fact, Black Lives Matter became an international movement out of which people were forced, organizations, governments, individuals were forced to look at exactly what was happening to Black people in the United States, where it appeared that there was systemic racism at the root of these killings. So this commission heard some 44 cases, there's 44 killings, and that was, as Collette mentioned, the tip of the iceberg. We took some cases, some of the victims, and we looked at, and I won't try to call all of them, Eric Gardner, Clinton Allen, Botham Jean, who was from St. Lucia, the Caribbean, Tarika Wilson, Freddie Gray, Tamir Rice, Malcolm Ferguson, Michael Brown, Shem Walker, Nathaniel Pickett II, Aaron Campbell, Tyrone West, Andrew Kearney, Marquise Jones, Jarvis Benjamin, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Kayla Moore, Sean Bell. We looked at some 44 different killings of unarmed Black civilians by policemen. The world remembers the plaintive cry of George Floyd, I can't breathe, but there was the equally plaintive and poignant words of Vincent Truitt, why did you shoot me? Collette mentioned the suffering that these killings brought on communities and families, and we had evidence of this before the commission, where families of victims appeared and gave their testimony. And for instance, there's Sean Bell, who was shot in 2006. And in 2021, the mother and wife of Sean Bell are still suffering. So there's tremendous devastation that is brought on families and communities by these killings. Now, it is very important that the international community, that we all as fellow humans do what we can to bring the international spotlight on these killings in the United States. There were some trends that we saw throughout the hearings. One was the impunity with which these killings were perpetrated, that it was very rare for the killers, the policemen, to be brought to justice. And this, for many of the families, provided a lack of closure to the whole sordid episode. And the compensation we found, in some cases, there were compensation granted, but that did not satisfy the craving for justice. And when asked, well, what would bring justice, inevitably we were told justice for them would be to have the policeman be convicted and be thrown in jail for a long time, be punished for these unnecessary and blatant racist killings. So at the end of the, and I'm sure Kelly, you'll tell us more about this, we are preparing a report. The International Commission will prepare a report, and there will be recommendations. We are not, they're still being formed, but we seek to have the support of the international community at every level, whether it be at the level of the White House, the Black Caucus, the European Union, the African Union. We need to have the world say, no, this should not continue. And this cannot continue, cannot be allowed to continue. The rights of Black people, the right to life particularly, is being infringed. And the United States, like every country in the world, must adhere to these international standards of human rights. And these blatant systemic killings of Black people in the United States do not measure up to international standard of human rights. I think every person, one cannot discriminate. Every person in the United States have a right to be able to go to the corner store and come back without being killed. Every parent should not have to train his child as to how to react if a policeman approaches him so as to come out of the communication alive. That those are basic rights that we have to live in peace in the community. So the work of this commission is very important in bringing that international, in fact, in assisting the United Nations in its work, in its report that the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights must produce to the Council, UN Human Rights Council. So we are seeking the support of everyone at every level to ensure that the recommendations of the Commission and the recommendation of the Commission are attended to in quick time in the United States. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you so much, Sir Claire. Thank you. I know that there are more questions and comments, and I will open it up for questions and comments after we've heard from our final speaker. So our next speaker is Professor Nilofer Bhagwat, who's a commissioner for the Commission of Inquiry, Vice President of the Indian Association of Lawyers and of the Confederation of Lawyers for Asia and the Pacific region. Nilofer? You're still muted. Okay, there you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
This commission of inquiry produced evidence covering a period of 2 decades, that is 20 years, and the families and attorneys led evidence across 33 cities and 20 states. Apart from the seriousness of the individual cases, our attention was focused on the systematic institutional racism in the United States against the descendants of the African American community, which shocked the collective conscience of the commissioner. In particular, because if the justice system itself has failed the African American community. A doctrine was invented by the United States Supreme Court, namely the doctrine of qualified immunity, which was not an integral part of the Civil Rights Act passed in 1861, which was never enforced by the Supreme Court for 100 years after this act was passed. And it was enforced in a very casual manner in 1961. And thereafter, at the height of the civil rights movement, emerged this doctrine of qualified immunity, that any police officer would be exonerated, even in cases of serious lethal police violence and killings of innocent African Americans, merely by pleading that I felt threatened or I was not aware of the law. A justice of the United States Supreme Court herself has commented on this matter and observed that this doctrine invented by the Supreme Court actually was a justification for the lack of accountability of police officials for serious crimes committed. And it justifies a shoot first and justify later approach by the police force. The racial profiling and the racist attitude of the police force is directly linked to the history of slavery, the use of slave labor, the so-called convict labor which was supplied even after the Civil War, the lynchings which took place without accountability, as a consequence of which today there is structural racism in US society. Attorneys presented before us and explained that there is discrimination in housing, in education, there's wide disparity in access to healthcare, access to employment, the absence of adequate African American representation in legislative bodies, in public office, in the police force, in all institutions of the state, directly leads to the racial profiling and justifies, and the police force justifies their violence against African Americans on the basis of this rooted structural racism which exists in the society in the United States. We were also informed that both parties, the Republican and Democratic parties, were complicit, as for decades, in fact, over a period of not decades, over 4 centuries, this structural racism and racist violence has continued. We are aware, all of us are aware of the focus on the European Holocaust, the Slav, the Jewish, and the Gypsy people. Here, there is a shocking situation where the Holocaust, the genocide of the descendants of the African American community and of the indigenous Native Americans of the United States, has been bypassed and not recorded historically as a Holocaust, which is a racist narrative of world history, which also has to be addressed by our commission. Another important aspect of the whole issue is the war on drugs and the manner in which this war on drugs was waged. Firstly and primarily, it was discriminatory, as certain substances were focused on for criminalization, such as crack cocaine. And the drugs used by the upper classes and other communities was exempt from being covered under the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act of 1994, which increased prison cells by 1,25,000, increased the funding of the police by 3 billion. And in this war on drugs, it was used to racially profile the African American community, which has had a serious effect. On the one hand, the cartels, drug lords, and the banks and financial institutions laundering the drugs were being given impunity. And on the other hand, grenades were launched into the houses and homes and neighborhoods of the African American community. And they were profiled on the streets by stop and frisk orders, all kinds of investigations, and their homes were raided in this war on drugs. And as a consequence of this so-called war on drugs, a private prison industry has grown in the United States, which profiteers on the imprisonment of people of color, in particular of the African American community. Another serious aspect of this entire evidence has been that children have observed their parents being attacked and killed mercilessly by the police force. The police officials have disregarded the fact that children were present when they were shooting a hail of bullets, totally unjustified firing, with a view to directly kill innocent members of the African American community who were unarmed and killed in front of their children, a trauma which they will carry for life. What we observed was that from case to case, it took only a few seconds or a few minutes after the police officials arrived on the spot for victims to be killed by a hail of bullets. And no attempt at investigation, inquiry, or de-escalation through dialogue was made in any of these cases, which is serious, as it indicates that the police officials are trigger happy while dealing with the African American community. In this context, I have to point out and I have to highlight that we cannot address this issue of structural racism unless we address the issue of reparation. Victims of the Jewish Holocaust have been paid reparation by the German government. However, though for centuries the African American community have been victims of a Holocaust, and so have the indigenous Native Americans, there is no initiative whatsoever within the United States and at the international level to secure that reparation is paid, and the manner in which it can be done is by addressing the issue of structural racism within the United States with an adequate representation in all public posts and ensuring access to health, to education, to nutrition, and to employment. The seriousness of the whole situation has been accepted in a report of the Department of Justice. The US Department of Justice in 2015 produced a report on the city of Ferguson. And it will interest you as to what the contents of this report was. This report acknowledged that the city of Ferguson Police Department had used systematic racist violence against members of the African American community. That the city council had failed to respond to directions of the Department of Justice, and that the municipal court of the city of Ferguson was more interested in revenue collection from members of the African American community. And this was adversely impacting the police and justice system and its attitude to the African American community. This report was commissioned by the Department of Justice after the protest in the Michael Brown case, where a young African American who aged 18, walking down a lane, was shot by a hail of bullets by the police force. Despite the fact that he put up his hand, he had committed no offense and said, "Please don't shoot me." From case to case, the police commissioners heard the same words being repeated, victim after victim. "Please don't shoot me." And this is the state of affairs where 13.4% of the citizens of the United States of America are pleading with the police force, please do not shoot. It indicates the seriousness of the situation, and the international community cannot stand by and view this very serious state of affairs. As a consequence of which, even the Department of Justice of the United States of America had to file a suit against its own city, recording these facts and stating before a court that the city of Ferguson, the police officials, have used systematic racist violence on the African American community. This is an admission by the government of the United States of the real situation. It is not as though a case is being made out only by members of the African American community. The government of the United States has gone on record in two public documents, a report of the Department of Justice and the civil suit filed by them against the city of Ferguson. I would like to conclude by saying that we urge the members of the African Union, the Inter-American Commission, to support the inquiry and the recommendations which will be shortly published and publicly circulated. As without international support, you are aware that as far as the dismantling of apartheid in South Africa was concerned, the African American community of the United States has played a major role. We expect, as a reciprocal gesture, that the African Union, the Inter-American Commission, and various governments will support the report and the recommendations of the committee.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to allow people to ask some questions and make some comments, but two things. First, I want to respond to Basir Mchawi. Yes, this report is going to be shared with the public. The report will be made available to the public around mid-April, so next month. Also, one of our commissioners, one of our other 12 commissioners, joined the call as an attendee, but I'd like to give him the opportunity to share some thoughts. Commissioner Fournier. Okay, let's see. All right, Commissioner Fournier, Arturo? Okay.
All right, I think, can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, thank you very much. Well, I was just attending, listening to this interesting panel. I was not destined to participate. Nevertheless, as one of the 12 commissioners, I formed part of Team 5 along with Professor Nikura from Japan, and we were quite impressed of all the testimonies heard and what we could prove of some of the cases, 9 cases that we investigated. It is quite appalling to listen to such things in the middle of the 21st century. It really can't continue to be like that, and violence should be stopped because we need to respect the fundamental human rights, and the most important of them all, human dignity and life. That is very, very important. And as a Costa Rican, you know, the Inter-American Human Rights Pact was signed in Costa Rica, and my country is also the siege of the International Human Rights Court. And so we live with human rights all the time, even though, well, there are some cases also here in this country, of course, not as terrible as those that we witnessed during the hearings, but everything we can do, all the effort that could be put towards the respect of human rights and obtaining justice is something very, very important, quite transcendent. And therefore, I ask the international community, please, to take into consideration the recommendations that will be issued by the Commission. Thank you very much, and my greetings to all of you, and my sympathy to all the families of the victims.
Oh, thank you. Okay, let's see. I see that Cecile Johnson has her hand raised. Cecile, go ahead.
Yeah, greetings, everyone. First, I want to thank you for all the activists and lawyers who made this happen. But I want to thank the commissioners. When I listened to Commissioner Bagwat giving her summation of her understanding of our issues, my heart, I just want to cry because we have felt so unheard in the world. And for the plea from the commissioners for the world to hear us and take action is just like heartwarming. And so I look forward to hearing about this, reading the commission's findings. Commissioner Bagwat did a good summary. We also want to take it to one step further. We are 47+ million people here in the United States. And in 1960, when the UN had its Decolonization Act, all countries of the world who had colonized people were supposed to declare their colonized people. The United States did not declare us. And as such, we have made a request to the Decolonization Committee because we filed a Declaration of Self-Determination in 2017 and presented it to the UN High Commission in 2018 and sent a request to the Decolonization Committee to put us on there. Why? Because this is an issue of self-determination. Our communities are controlled by everyone but ourselves. And I have sent you information, a presentation, which shows you every area of our lives, how they have impacted us in a negative way. The only solution for us is more than what you're asking for as it relates to the police violence and, yes, addressing the systemic racism, but it's also an issue of self-determination. And we would ask that you guys look at that also. ICCPR, International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Article 1 says all people have a right to self-determination. So why not us? Look at what has happened to us historically. We are prisoners of war. We are prisoners of war. The action of the government, the Supreme Court decisions, the white nationalist government as it relates to both parties. I'm so glad she mentioned that. She mentioned that both parties have been complicit There's no solution there. And please, though we have had a change in administration, please, please, please do not take that to mean that anything significant is going to change as it relates to the operation on the ground in our communities, right? So the shining of the light by you will definitely help, but it has to go further. Why can we not be added to the decolonization list? Why can we not be self-determined? Why can we not? Then we could have a free association agreement with the United States, and we could begin to control our communities, control our destiny, control our economics, control our health, and have peaceful relations within the United States, with the United States, but as a self-determined people. So I want to thank you all, and I want to thank the activists here in the United States who helped to make this happen, even when the UN at first did not want to pay attention to us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cecile. Are there any other questions? There are a lot of comments in the chat, but I couldn't even begin to try to read them all. Okay, so here's a question from Julia Wright. Mumia has serious congestive heart failure and, well, it's not a question actually, but she's talking about Mumia Abu Jamal, a political prisoner here in the United States. And I think people around the world know of his situation. Julia, do you want to speak and make your comment and ask for some kind of solidarity, or do you just want me to read what you wrote? Okay, so yeah, she just writes that he has serious congestive heart failure and COVID-19 behind bars, but is refused access to treatment. Yeah, and he's refused access to his trusted medical consultant specifically. Okay. All right, so let's see. All right, from Marion Gray, you can speak.
Yes, hi, Marion Gray-Hopkins. And unfortunately, my son, Gary Hopkins Jr., was murdered by the police in November of 1999. And so we have continued to see the killings across this country at a rate of over 1,000 victims per year. We've in the past, and I have testified before the United Nations regarding these very issues of police terrorism in the United States with little to no change. Basically, no changes have been made over the years. So my question would be to the commissioners, what do we see that's going to be different this time because we've gone through the same process in the past with no changes?
Yes.
Were you able to hear my question? Hello?
Take off your mute, Nilufer. Professor Bagwat, you're on mute.
Okay, well, I think she just unmuted. Do it one more time, Nilufer. There, you're good. Yes, yes, we can hear you now.
I would like to answer this question. You see, earlier, when these attempts were made to move the UN Human Rights Council and the United Nations, various bodies and authorities, there was no political movement within the United States of the kind which you have now. Today, we have a mass movement in the United States of the African American, of descendants of the African American community, supported by democratic elements within the United States. I don't mean the Democratic Party, I mean democratic-minded individuals and citizens. So there is a movement. It is not merely a petition going. There is a movement behind this activity. whenever you have to rectify a situation, that requires a mass movement which puts political pressure both within the system as well as calls for international solidarity and support. That is how the dismantling of the apartheid system of South Africa took place, by a movement within South Africa and international support and international solidarity. International solidarity and support without a movement in the United States would not yield the results which is going to happen now. Further, the government of the United States has weakened. It is no longer a unipolar power. The United States of America is no longer the preeminent economic, political, and military power in the world. That has also made a difference, because there were elements, there were governments who were ready to toe the line of the United States on any and every issue. That situation no longer exists. Today, we are in a multipolar world. The United States is one of the multipolar powers. It is not the unipolar power. This situation, for the first time in history, this situation has resulted in an opening for the African American community. The balance of political forces have shifted, both within the United States as well as internationally. And that is why this is going to make a difference to the situation. The movement within the United States, the weakening of the United States government, both within and internationally, and international solidarity is going to make the difference. And this is a change in the history. Have I answered the question?
Thank you, Nilofer. So we have time for one more question. I see that Sylvester Jackson has his hand raised. Sylvester?
Yes, how you doing?
Okay.
I was in a meeting earlier when I got the information about this forum going on, but I have a question. What can organizations here in this country do to galvanize, the resources and forces to become more effective on pushing for this change? Thank you.
Commissioners, do you want to respond? Thoughts?
I don't know. Let me say, go ahead.
You.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think Professor's point about solidarity is very important. And we have the opportunity now with the Black Lives Matter being taken on international proportion. And this, our commission putting international spotlight on how Black people are treated in the United States. I think this is a unique opportunity to have this awful situation rectified. My experience has shown that with the Inter-American Commission, that when countries are put in the spotlight by other countries, they pay attention. It seems to be more powerful than the domestic organizations to have international organizations, international community, people from all over the world focusing on this, whatever is happening in that country. It tends to be more effective. So I would say solidarity with Professor on that, and to keep pressing.
Nilüfer, did you want to add anything?
Yes, I would like to add.
Mhm.
Within the United States, it is necessary to widen the base of the movement, to take all people of color along, the African American community, the communities of the Caribbean, from the Latino community, the Asian community, and bring on board the sections, the democratic section of the white community and white races also, who are ready to support, so that you build up a mass based on the necessity to stop the fragmentation of society within the United States, to end the fragmentation of the United States on the basis of race, and build up a broad unity for justice to those races and communities who have faced genocide and Holocaust, as a consequence of which there is structural racism which inevitably fragments the society in the United States. You have to convince a broader group of people that to prevent the fragmentation of citizens in the United States, justice to those who have been disinherited by an institutional system is the need of the hour, because that is what a republic and democracy is supposed to stand for: all-inclusive development. You cannot call yourself a republic and a democracy if you stand only for the development of some races and not other races. The touchstone of a democracy and a republic is there inclusive development of all races within a society. And it is on the basis of that appeal that you must build up. Really have a base, that base must be widened to include all those sections who are ready to stand on the issues that what we understand by a republic and democracy is justice for all races, justice to rectify genocide, justice to rectify 400 years of Holocaust against the African American and Native American indigenous community, justice for all people of color, justice for the citizens of the United States and the working people of as against an oligarchy of 1% interest represented by leading corporations and sectors. You have to widen the appeal.
Thank you both. We're at the end of our hour. So first, I'll just say thank you to Collette Flanagan, to Commissioner Roberts, Commissioner Bagwat, and Commissioner Fournier for being here and sharing your perspectives. Thank you so much to all the attendees that joined. I am putting the email address for, not the email address, the website for the Commission of Inquiry in the chat. Please continue to visit the website or visit it for the first time if you haven't already. The recordings of all of the hearings are there, as well as information about what's happening next. We will be sharing the report with the public in April, as I mentioned before. And yes, this report, it's not just for the High Commissioner's Office or for the US government. We want them to look at it as well, but we want it to be a resource for the community. So please look out for that. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.